We have a very underinvested, unstable, archaic national grid system.
We have to make sure we have the right skills to deliver on all of our remits. Deliver our power to KPLC, make sure the site is safe, all of these things that are critical. But we do have a very clear employment policy that says when you're hiring, priority goes to Marsabit, then to Kenya, and then outside Kenya.
The very first board meeting we ever had before groundbreaking, we were very clear we were going to have community engagement as a central, fundamental core to the business, and the idea of winds of change was mooted from the very beginning. And the idea that we were going to be guaranteeing a component of our revenues annually to winds of change and growing that over years from the very first board meeting. I'll remember this FinFund lady called Helena. Every board meeting should ask me, Muga, are we going to see any community projects today?
Dorothy Dale once asked, what is the sense of all our small efforts? Yet, it is these small efforts by a team that dared to dream that delivered Africa's largest wind farm here in Kenya. This is the Turbines of Marsabit. I'm your host, Paul Wafula. On this episode, I'm joined by Max Schiff, the CEO of Turkana Wind Farm, alongside Mugo Kibati, who is outgoing chairman of this project. Max, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
I mean, you've done a lot in your past 10 years in the energy sector, at least, being a general manager for Agreco East Africa, I think. But is this like something you have done before? What do you tell your daughter?
No, it's not like anything I've done before. Some of the fundamentals are the same, but Lake Turkana it's a special project. I mean, you mentioned at the entry, it's the largest wind farm on the continent, which is a great headline, but there's an awful lot more to it. This is a project that has significant impact environmentally, of course, significant benefits for the economy here in Kenya. It has an incredible impact locally. The community initiatives that it engages in are significant, extensive, and very, very meaningful. It's a fantastic employer. The way we employ and look after our staff is really something quite transformational. There's a real ethos in the project around doing the right thing and doing it properly, and that flows through everything that we do.
I just want to understand, when it rains, is there an issue with wind? Is there a drop in terms of the amount of wind that you generate? And if so, why?
Yes, there is a correlation. Generally, when we have rain, the wind declines, which is kind of amusing because we have a staff complement there who are working for a wind farm when they're on working hours, but they're generally pastoralists with herds during their non-working hours. So when it rains and the wind drops, they feel very conflicted for their employer, but they feel delighted for their herds. So you have this funny dynamic where people suddenly saying, I might just take a bit of leave this week. I might just do it because they want to organize their herds to get them to the grazing area. So you see sort of a few people thinking a bit more flexible with their working hours as they go and deal with their livestock, which is all well and good. But actually this year, you remember earlier this year, we had significant rains across the country, and we had massive rains in Marsabit, which was very bad for the wind. I actually took over management control from the former CEO on the 1st of April. And April and May were the lowest two production months that the site has had in history.
It was quite a baptism by fire for him.
It was a little bit. I think
in his first
a bad
month
omen.
as CEO earlier this year.
Yeah,
The wind. So when he was reporting to the board, he had to report this.
There's no wind.
There was suspicion in the area.
I took over wind, and now there's no wind.
Yeah, exactly. We have recovered. I'd be glad to know. And the winds have picked up. We've had some great months recently, delivered a lot of energy into the grid, and we've clawed back a bit there. But that is what it is. But actually, the wind trajectory in the area has been going up over the course of the project rather than down. So this was an unusual year.
I mean, just sticking to the facts, there's a big question that, every viewer of this podcast will be asking themselves. There was a big blackout in this country some time back.
Yeah.
And everybody was looking at Marsabit. What really happened?
Everybody?
There was a question.
And you said a big blackout?
There was called a national.
Was it just one?
It was called a national blackout. I think one is memorable because there was a statement that was issued, I think.
So look, let me speak to that because...
you go ahead, Anna. You go ahead.
Because
I'm
first of
happy
all,
for you to.
that is before Marx's time.
Yes.
It was under a different CEO, the predecessor to Marx. And look, let me just say what the CS for Energy indicated Parliament. I know there was a statement that was issued by the Kenya Power Lighting Company on the day after the blackout, and I think you'll recall we issued a counter, a very clear counter. And over the next few weeks, when the Cabinet Secretary for Energy was in Parliament, he gave the real reason. And the real reason we have a very underinvested, unstable, archaic national grid system. And so that particular attempt, without any investigation, to pin the blame on Lake Turkana. Actually, Lake Turkana, as I indicated earlier, actually is a net benefit to the stability of the national grid because of the stabilization.
DRPC.
The DRP, that we have put in. And I don't know, I think we're the only plant.
We are.
We're the only plant in this country that has a stabilizer that actually supports stabilizing the national grid to the benefit of others. So actually, it was actually very unfair to point a finger at the very entity that helps with stabilization. And at that time, when in speaking to the energy officials, I don't want to name any names, and I told them, look, you better go there and give the true reason because it's going to happen again. And you cannot keep pointing. It's going to happen. It won't be like Turkana, right? And so eventually, I think reason prevailed, and I think the Ministry of Energy was very candid in its submissions about the fact that we do need to do something about the national grid, and that is why, unfortunately, we've had a contract to address the national grid, which seems to be in some kind of facing a challenge. But we actually are long overdue to work on our national transmission system in this country. And that actually, of course, there are a few power plants here and there that are not up to snuff, but really the national grid is the problem. But I don't know if Marx would like to add anything.
No, I agree. I guess there are people listening who are interested in the sector, and I'm sure that they would agree with what you've said. I mean, look, in terms of blackout and disconnection and plants going down, as Mugo said, if there's variation on the grid, so if the voltage goes outside of normal parameters, each plant will have protection settings that allow it to accommodate a variation of a specific amount for a specific time, after which it will disconnect, and it will disconnect to protect itself from effectively, for want of a better term, getting fried. Our plant is no different, and those protection settings relate to the grid code. So if we have a variation of 10% for more than 50 seconds, our plant will disconnect. Otherwise, we risk losing the entire plant.
And that's a variation coming from the grid,
yes,
not from the plant.
Yes, correct.
Yeah.
We don't want to infect. It's like protecting yourself from a virus coming to the plant. Sorry, go ahead.
But it's a fundamental requirement for any power plant anywhere in the world. And sometimes we disconnect, but we do have this dynamic reactive power compensator, which is a very complex name. We can shorten it to DRPC. But these are reactors that when we see variations in the grid, it injects reactive power into the national grid, not just the line from Loyangalani down to Suswa into the national grid. And that will help bring it back into norms everywhere, the whole grid. I was in the substation at Katrako, Loyangalani, our site, and an alarm went off. One of the substations just outside Nairobi here had an issue, and there was an over voltage, and our DRPC kicked in and stabilized it from all the way up in Marsabit. So in terms of grid stability, it's a huge value add. It's actually one we don't charge for as well. In European and developed markets, reactive power is billable. We don't bill for it. Okay. And it is of huge benefit to the grid. But what Mugo said is right. The investment in the transmission infrastructure and substations across the country is a priority. Even before we start talking about when are the next power plants coming on, we need to be able to take the power from those power plants and deliver it to the user stably. And that is the function of transmission and distribution. And The government's aware. We've heard the CS talk about it. He's serious and committed to it. And I hope it can happen as soon as possible.
When there's a power blackout in the country, of course, I engage Max, but I am always pretty confident that it has nothing to do with Lake Turkana. In fact, I call to find out how we've been impacted negatively as Lake Turkana wind power. But as I said earlier on, and Max would be much better to speak to this, we've put in measures uniquely as a power plant in this country to help with the instability that, as I said, we have to deal with and address in our national transmission line, the national grid. And so, as I said, just a direct answer to your question, there's a blackout. I'm pretty confident that Lake Turkana is actually helping the country. And I think Max can even confirm that, stabilizing the national grid. And again, that's not normally spoken to in the to and fro in this country about who's to blame for what.
Yeah. Okay, Mogo, you talked about $1 billion in terms of investment, giving back to the community that you operate in, and you keep investing. But there's one question. If you were to go to Loyangalani today, the village next door always feels like they're in darkness. How do you explain that?
From the get-go, we were very clear and made the offer to KPLC, and because KPLC is the only mandated distributor of power to individual homes or commercial entities. But we made it very clear that we were available. We will make power available to the areas around the plant in Marsabit County, as long as we're facilitated by KPLC and we have the proper arrangements with KPLC. And I think that is now in high gear, about to happen, because unfortunately for the people for that village next door, all power plants have to supply the national grid, right? And then the national grid, from a central perspective, distributes to the rest of the country via KPLC, right? So plucking, a line from the power plant to some local village is not as easy as it may sound. We do have to follow the framework that this country has for power distribution. But it is a conversation that we have been having with the Ministry of Energy and KPLC, and I think there's something imminent in that area. But I think Max, he's actually on the ball as far as that is concerned. We better be able to speak about it.
I'm sure it's a big question, Max.
Look, it is a big question.
Yeah.
And obviously in my role, community engagement, community interaction is regular and significant. And the first thing to say is I completely recognize that grievance or complaint. If you're sitting in the dark and you're looking at the largest wind farm on the continent on your doorstep, it's an obvious question. And also a lack of electrification is a challenge. So it's a very fair comment and one that we should listen to in earnest. But Mugo's right. It's not our job to do that. In fact, our generation license and our contract with KPLC is very specific that we generate power, we sell to KPLC. So after the turbines generate and we collect it at our substation, we deliver it to Catraco. That's the end of our remit. And there's not anything else we can do. It is for Catraco, REREC, KPLC to determine how they're going to transmit, distribute, and deliver, market that power. And it's worth understanding their standpoint as well. If for 100 bob you can connect 100 people rather than 100 bob connecting 20 people in a closer area because of population density, then it's probably the right decision in terms of use of resource. And those are the difficult decisions that the utility has to make. Yeah. And that's the reality. So, they have limited resource and that's a constraint for them as well, but they are working on it. There are plans in place for a connection from us to Marsabit, which will benefit people. There are plans in place to connect Loyangalani, but these will all have to happen within the context of the utilities plan and resource availability. And it's not easy work. It'll take a bit of time, but the intent is there. And as I say, if we could do more, that would be great. But it's not our remit, and I do understand that complaint.
And let me just add to what Max is saying, why national policy making and national planning is important. And it's not advisable for aspects or areas around the country to start having their own localized solutions. I mean, when you have a national grid and you have distribution from that national grid, remember it's taking power not just from Lake Turkana, but from all the other generating power plants across the country, Kenya and all the other IPPs. So should something, for whatever reason, happen to Lake Turkana, and you're solely dependent on Lake Turkana, then yes, you're connected. Yeah. But when Lake Turkana goes down, you go down. Yeah. The benefit of having the kind of framework we have, where KPLC is able to harness all the generation across the country and supply even Marsabit, is that you're not left at the whims of any particular power plant going up or down. No. Yeah. Now, what does need to happen, harking back to Vision 2030, is that Marsabit County needs to be electrified. Yeah. It needs to be on the national grid, and it's long overdue. For that to happen, because even if we are to have that local solution, it is not the optimal solution for the reasons Max has given in terms of efficiency from a distributor, like KPLC perspective, but also from the perspective of the users. They don't want to rely on a single point of failure. Yeah. And I think, therefore, having the target of distributing or electrifying all populations across the country, it's a tall order, but that ultimately is a solution.
Max, you cannot solve or satisfy 70,000 people. Acres and acres of land. But you have to do your part. But how do you balance the interests of the community and, of course, the need to continue supporting and that of the shareholders?
I don't think there's any conflict between the needs of the community and the shareholders. I think we're very aligned with our shareholders, as I mentioned, on the need to do this and the need to do it meaningfully and at big scale. But your initial question is a good one. How do we manage expectations? And I think the answer to that is with a lot of hard work, but also with an attitude of transparency and openness. I mentioned 301 staff that we employ. There's also about 280 indirect employees through our subcontractors on site. So enough 600 people. And for Lake Turkana, our employees, 80% of them come from the area. So we have a big touch point there. And we have a lot of credibility and trust there. We also have 6 years worth of really positive track record with Winds of Change. So people know we're there to do the right thing. Our relationship with the community is outstanding. But we spend a lot of time, hundreds and hundreds of engagements a year through our community liaison team, but also through other members of staff. We have open days just to explain what are we doing, how are we doing it, why, what are the limitations, how do we work together, what does positive partnership between Lake Turkana and the community mean? And also, we hear you. You want more jobs. We understand that. There's a dynamic in Kenya where we have far more graduates every year than we have new jobs. That is a problem, and you are right to be concerned. And we would never dismiss or infantilize their concerns, but we also need to explain that to be a sustainable business, we can't issue 70,000 jobs. We have to balance sustainability within the business and delivering for the community. And I think an employer of our size being 80% from Marsabit and 19% from Kenya, there's 3 expats in the business only, so 1% is a fantastic achievement. And we work hard to keep those levels up. We have to make sure we have the right skills to deliver on all of our remits, deliver our power to KPLC, make sure the site is safe, all of these things that are critical. But we do have a very clear employment policy that says when you're hiring, priority goes to Marsabit, then to Kenya, and then outside Kenya. And we're happy to do that. It creates a lot more work. It means that we invest heavily in skills development and training for our staff once they're in, which is great, but it requires resource. So I think the fact that we've done all this and we can explain it and we are transparent and we are available helps us manage those expectations. People understand that Samis is huge and the need is massive and we on our own can't solve it. And I think when you explain that limitation within the context of all the good work that's been done, it's accepted in good faith. And that's probably the best approach to managing expectations in an area.
100 projects so far done in the region. I see most of them are around education and water. How do you identify these projects and what has been the impact so far on the ground?
So the focus, it's education, health and water. Those are our focus areas. I'll just take you back a little bit. So Winds of Change, you've mentioned. And I just want to explain a little bit about how it works with Lake Turkana. So firstly, it's it's effectively one and the same. So every year, Lake Turkana Wind Power provides funding to Winds of Change for community investment. And to be honest, that funding really is contributed by our shareholders. And it's worth remembering that our shareholders started investing in 2009. They're actually yet to even recover their principal investment. I think there's a perception that these international investors are making huge sums of money out of this. If you lent me 1,000 bob in 2009 and I still only paid you 800 back, I don't think you'd be overwhelmed with that investment. But despite that, every year, the first thing on the budget, the first thing approved is the Winds of Change financing. This year, we increased it from 500 to 750,000 euros. I think it's worth mentioning the commitment that our shareholders have to this. In terms of answering your question, how do we use those funds? We have a fantastic team of 25 community liaison officers that's run by Joblan Goyap, who's stationed at site. He coordinates that team. Every year, they will select a number of priority locations. And the way they do that is they'll look around Lysamis, which is our focus area. So this is about 22,000 square kilometers. It's a huge area. There's 70,000 plus people in the area. We'll look at where have we done projects? How long ago? What did we do? Has anyone missed out? Is there anything particular that's urgent? We'll get the locations. We'll identify them. Say, right, let's say 6 locations for next year. The community team will go and sit with the community there and all of the various leaders, and they'll say, what are your priorities? You tell us what your priorities are within this remit that we have on health, education, and water. And let's boil it down to 3. And you guys decide and tell us. And then of those 3, we'll pick one that we can deliver for each area. So it's a very bottom up. It's a community driven. We don't go in and tell people this is what you need. We know best. That's not the way it works. We'll listen, we'll prioritize, and we'll deliver as much as we can on the basis that we want to obviously have maximum impact with every shilling or every euro spent. And to date, that's well over 6 million euros that we've done through these projects. So it's a lot. It's a lot. And this is, Winds of Change is really part of the DNA of Lake Turkana Wind. Yeah. So all the money we put in goes into projects. The people who design, procure, deliver, oversee, do the quality assurance of those projects, the vehicles used to get to and from, the fuel used to get, that's Lake Turkana. That's not within the funding to Winds of Change. So actually the investment is much bigger, but also in time. I spend a lot of my time on it. Everyone in our business is involved, and it's really a central part of our culture. Our first priority is to generate power. Our second is to make sure that we help development in the community, and it's something we take seriously and we enjoy doing, not just because it's the right thing, which it is, but it's also fundamental to our operation. That relationship is key to the sustainability of what we do. And it's a pleasure really doing it. It is.
I mean, Mugo.
Let me speak to that actually, because, he just said it's in our DNA. And there are some shareholder representatives and board members that I started with way back in 2014 who would have, what Max just said would have been music to their ears. Because at the very first board meeting we ever had, before groundbreaking, we were very clear we were going to have community engagement as a central, fundamental core to the business, and the idea of Winds of Change was mooted from the very beginning. And the idea that we're going to be guaranteeing a component of our revenues annually to Winds of Change and growing that over years from the very first board meeting. I'll remember this FinFund lady called Helena. Every board meeting should ask me, Muga, are we going to see any community projects today? Straight from Helsinki. The first, the board, as he said, it was very international, high-level international, representative of all these equity investors, and I mentioned some of them earlier on. This was critical to the board ab initio. People like William Dollerman, right, who chairs Winds of Change. That same gentleman I mentioned who was fishing in 1985 has been chairing this Winds of Change board, and that has been his focus. And allow me to say that the founding fathers of this project, the Turkana Wind Power, people like William Dollerman, Carlo van Wagenen, Helena that I mentioned earlier from Helsinki, and even the gentleman who really helped with the financial structuring of this project, Rizwan Fazal. From the very beginning, without this kind of people, we wouldn't have a project like this. standing today, and you asked me earlier about lessons learned. We must learn how to encourage people who undertake difficult things with sophistication and expertise and stick-to-itiveness, the grit to go through it. But, so Winds of Change, as Max has said, has been part of our DNA. When we have board meetings and we're able to, on site, make a point of visiting and understanding this project. But as Max has said, we leave it to the priorities of the communities themselves. And we've designed a structure that allows the selection, the prioritization of what's to be supported to be driven by the communities. Of course, with some guidance as to what's possible and not possible, but the selection and prioritization is by them. And just to say, when you talk about supporting or engaging the local community and how you transform, obviously CSR type projects come to mind, right? But for Turkana, it's much bigger than that. Remember that we came to an area that had never engaged in any kind of formal institution. And, there's a funny story how one day, at the very beginning, at the beginning we had during construction, I think he said we have 301 permanent employees today. We're in operation. But at the beginning, when we had construction going on, there were over 2,000 people on site, most of them local. And I got a call from the then general manager, CEO, telling me, Chairman, we almost had a riot here today on payday. Because when they got their pay and they looked at their pay slip, they're like, what do you mean? You've cut out money. These people are stealing money from us. Why? Because statutory deductions, the notion of pay as you earn taxes, NSSF, NHIF was foreign and alien, they never encountered that. So even formalizing the area and getting it acculturated to, when I say joining the socioeconomic fabric of the country, that is an intangible that we don't talk about in terms of our impact on the local community. So of course today it's a funny story, but at the time it was serious, and it took painstaking explaining to these people that look, no one has taken anything from you. Look at the payslip, and we shall explain to you exactly what it means. And I think sometimes we forget where we have come from. And why, for me, even as I leave, I am proud of the fact that we didn't run away from doing this in Loyangalani, and we stuck to it with grit, lots of serious challenges, even for me at a personal level, but we're where we are today. And I think the people in the area, especially in the Loyangalani and the Laisamis constituency that Max has talked about, are benefiting, and in the future will continue to benefit.
12%, sometimes 20% on peak times.
Yeah.
Is this a serious responsibility for you as the CEO of Turkana Wind? Just knowing that every gigabyte on the national grid out of 10, you're looking at least 1 point that is you actually controlling.
It is a serious responsibility. It's one I take very seriously. But I'm very lucky. I have a very good team around me who share the responsibility. This is the job of, we have at the moment 301 permanent staff, all of which contribute to this effort. They take it very seriously as well. And they may be engaged in the technical side, which you would think of on a wind farm, or they may be engaged in finance side. They may be engaged in the security at site. They may be engaged in the admin side, but all of these people work really effectively together to guarantee that power supply is there. And we do a fantastic job. I'm not blowing my own trumpet here, but I am giving a collective pat on the back to the team.
Yeah.
The availability of our plant is at about 98.6%, which is phenomenal. Yeah. You always have to maintain some of your turbines. We have 365 and we have to look after them. So sometimes we take one offline, we do a maintenance on it. So that's why it's 98.6 and it's not 100%, but that's a very, very high level. And I think Mugo had mentioned, we also have a very high capacity factor. So we turn wind energy into electrical energy very, very efficiently, as efficiently as any plant in the world, if not more. So yes, look, it's a responsibility, but I have complete confidence in the team and I see the work that goes in 24 hours a day to make sure that we are there and we are available and we are generating power effectively and safely to deliver to our customer, KPLC, and to the homes and the businesses around the country. So it's manageable.
Yeah, 8.7 cents, one of the lowest tariffs we've seen. If you look at that in terms of just impact on the national grid and how much you're actually contributing towards reducing power prices in Kenya, how does that look like?
There's a few elements to it. So first, yes, we are the most affordable IPP on the grid, and that's a great place to be. We're very proud of that. And obviously, because of our scale, that means that the power we generate has a very meaningful impact on the end cost to the customer. And that is key. We know that cost of living has been a challenge. It is a challenge. Inflation is a challenge. The last few years, we've obviously seen quite acute issues around cost of living. That impacted Kenya particularly, but also countries around the world. This was not a Kenyan issue. This was a global issue. And a lot of it was driven by increase in energy prices. And a lot of that obviously stemmed from the war in Ukraine, which was a major driver of that. And when you look at how we operate, we obviously produce energy from wind. We displace a huge amount of fuel, let's say. So that could be HFO or diesel that would be used for a comparative amount of energy generated from thermal power plants. Now, EPRA does statistics on this every year. The cost of fuel that is displaced by energy from Lake Turkana wind power is around 90 million euros a year. So up to the end of September this year, the total amount was 533 million euros. That is a big sum of money. Now, during the period that I just mentioned where we saw cost of living issues increase in fuel costs, energy costs, we also saw a contraction in availability of hard currency, foreign currency. And that was a problem in Kenya. Other countries, Nigeria, Egypt, experienced the same, but a lot of countries, particularly around the region, had that issue too. And avoiding that fuel consumption also helps the balance of trade for the country. It also alleviates strain on foreign currency, which means there's a bit more for other businesses who need to import things from abroad and for the government who needs to pay debt in hard currency or also make imports in hard currency. So whilst we have a very significant impact on cost of energy for commercial consumers, individual consumers, households, communities, we also have a much broader impact on the economy at a macro level. And that is something that's worth remembering. And it's a common theme in renewables where you're not using fuel, but obviously due to our scale, the level of that contribution and that impact is quite significant and something obviously that we're very pleased to deliver in Kenya.
The people in Nairobi, sitting in Nairobi, have no idea what you're talking about. About Marsabit or that part of all. The people who've never even crossed, Isiolo, for instance. And when he talks about Laisamis County being 22,000 square kilometers, Laisamis as a constituency is bigger than many counties in this country. Just Laisamis constituency is huge and massive, and it is barren, tough terrain. So even building a road or accessing a dispensary or a hospital or a school. So it adds to the complexity of doing community projects there as opposed to doing them here, in around the capital city, but also going back to the formal employment, because that is part of money expectation. The fact that you have 80% employees being local, with time, the understanding of our corporate structure works is becoming ingrained. I can tell you, in the early days. During the construction phase, I think, early mid-construction phase or early operational phase, I remember driving from the airstrip that we built, by the way, it's a project I did not mention, to the facility. And ahead of me was a sea of red. So we had a convoy of the board members coming from the airstrip, going towards the plant. And I saw a sea of red. And as I approached, it was all this Samburu morons, they were there blocking the way. And, I got out of the car. I'm very, very clear. In those days, we had a lot of experts, and I think we made a conscious decision that obviously because this is a project that had never been undertaken in this country, we didn't need a lot of expertise. I mean, the first board I chaired I was the only Kenyan, to be honest, and they were complaining, so there are 3 elders. So I looked at the situation. I saw 3 elders approach me. And they were very polite, very measured. But they're complaining because staffing decisions had been undertaken. Staffing decisions, transferring people, promoting some, not promoting others, which in most corporates you're used to and accustomed to, their routine. Yeah. But in that particular case, it became a community issue. That some people weren't treated unfairly because some got, some didn't. And they were waiting for the chairman
to come and explain.
The chairman who can speak to them in their language, in Swahili.
Yes.
And I took 1.5 hours talking to these 3 elders. And to be honest, I mean, it was painstaking, but they were reasonable people. And this is the kind of thing you have to do in that part of the world. You don't call police when you're in that part of the world. It's a different, completely different terrain. You talk and engage the communities and you bring them along. And there's nothing obvious. Okay? And when we were done, they understood. And the 3 elders, signaled to the 100 or so Morans to just fall out and let us go through.
What will have happened if they had said, no, you're not going?
I don't, but,
for another episode,
but my point is that it's community engagement. Yeah. It requires patience and reason. Yeah. And I think this today, that wouldn't happen. Why? Because of the stakeholder managed engagement we have undertaken, both through winds of change, through external community engagement, but also through them being part and parcel of Lake Turkana. Being people who work at Lake Turkana, and therefore, over time, the community is beginning to understand how corporate structures work. And therefore, when it comes to managing expectations, understanding the constraints that a corporate or an entity like Lake Turkana has to face in order to be able to do what we do with winds of change and actually become very appreciative. I can tell you that the last 4 or 5 years, each time I've visited Loyangalani, the reception I get from the community is fantastic because now they feel they're part of the team and they can see what Lake Turkana is trying to do. But more importantly, they also understand the constraints and what it takes to do what Lake Turkana does.
This is 80% of employees are local and it's a largely engineering outfit. How do you make sure that you scale and get women working at Lake Turkana Wind?
In the spirit of total transparency, it's a challenge. We are 90% male at Lake Turkana. We're open about that. It's in our sustainability report. We don't pretend we're not. There's a couple of dynamics. So yes, we are effectively an industrial plant, let's say, or an engineering company, but it's quite a small part of our staff that does that. So of the 300 Lake Turkana people, let's say, it's probably 10% who are sitting in our technical team. So that's run by Wellington Otieno, and he's got a dispatch team that interact with KPLC to basically coordinate power dispatch into the grid. He's got a maintenance team which makes sure the plant is running effectively. But everyone else, we have at any one time 500 people staying on site. So we have catering, we have logistics, we have fleet movement, we have an HSC team, we have an HR team, we have our finance and accounts. There's so much support that goes in behind it. So it's not just the fact that it's a sort of an engineering type business, but the other factor you mentioned, the area that we're in, I think is slightly more male dominated than some other areas and slightly more traditional in some of its values, which is what it is. And that does have an impact. But at a senior level, we have very good female representation. In fact, it's a higher proportion the more senior in the business that you go, but it's something we need to keep working on. And our site manager, Jonathan Hall, every time he's hiring a position within his teams, I know he walks in to our HR office and goes, have you got local respondents? Have you got female respondents? Can I see them on the top of the pile? So it's something that we focus on and we want to achieve, but we've got a long way to go.
And just to say, we have largely Samburu, Rendile, Turkana communities there. And just as I gave the example of, you don't call law enforcement, you work with them. We also, it's a balance between what we all accept as global standards of, individual self-determination. Male and female, you should be able to work and get the same rights, same everything in a company like Lake Turkana. That is actually our remit and our stance. But we have also got to balance that with the fact that there are local traditional norms, cultural norms, that have to evolve. We can nudge. We can nudge, but we have to be respectful.
Yeah.
So as Max is saying, and he's being polite, is you have community norms that where women are not put forward, and sometimes women need to be may not be encouraged, frankly, to apply for jobs. So you have a community where between a husband and a wife, the husband better be the one to get the job, not the wife. Nothing really Turkana, right? So over time, through education, through constant engagement, respecting cultures, because you must respect people if you're going to move them from point A to point B. I think we'll eventually do better, but it will take some time because of the cultural norms that we're dealing with. I mean, we've had instances where even, certain pays or bonuses have to be given to the husband of the worker.
Yeah.
But we don't, of course, because we deal directly with whoever it is, but immediately there's a transfer to the boss of the home, where she lives.
Yeah.
So we want to address those over time, working with the people to make them understand why it is important that the right to self-determination belongs to every individual male or female.
Yeah, you don't want to, Max, you may not want to destabilize that very fast. You get another 100 meters of morans next to you. So
that's good advice.
Let's talk about sustainability. I mean, how do you make sure that the programs and projects that you're doing are actually sustainable?
Are we talking specifically in...
Let's start with Winds of Change. Yeah.
So I think we look at impact. We've got our focus areas, which I've mentioned. And we, as I say, go through our needs assessment and we'll listen to the community. So sustainability is key, and it's a very trendy word. And we have a very robust sustainability plan. It's in our sustainability report, so it can be looked at. But I think it's also important to remember there's immediate need as well. There's immediate relief. When you look at things like neonatal mortality or deaths during childbirth, things like that in the county, you need to address those needs immediately. And we have an approach of providing facilities that can address those needs. We will partner with the county government and get confirmation from them that they will staff those facilities accurately or adequately, so that we know that we're not building a structure where no service can be provided, but we're building a structure where additional people will be employed to provide that service and people will get treated and the results will be achieved. So I think that kind of level of coordination in making sure that you have a means of addressing that very urgent need and it can be sustained is important. The second thing is we have a very strong focus on quality. So anything that we deliver or build, we do with a lot of thought, very good design, very good work, very good controls and checks as we go along. We do use, for all Winds of Change projects, we do use local contractors from the area to try and build capability in the supply chain. But we provide a lot of oversight to make sure the quality standards are there, the compliance is there. We'll make sure that these providers have their registrations with the KRA, they have their business licenses, they have everything up to date. And that's been a journey, getting them to do that. But now we have a good clutch of providers who understand the quality standards. And when you speak to people in the communities or in the areas where we build, when we do a handover of a project, the word quality is used every single time. And we now hear from contractors when they're asked to do works for everyone else in the area, they'll always say, we want Winds of Change quality. We want Winds of Change quality because our buildings are good and they're properly staffed and they're properly equipped and they're safe and they have everything that they need. So I think those are some of the major factors, really around ensuring what we deliver can be meaningful, have impact and be sustained.
That is all the time we had for you in this episode. This is the Turbines of Marsabit, a podcast about Africa's largest wind farm here in Kenya. If you're watching this episode and you'd like us to discuss or invite any guest, please leave a comment below it and do what all podcasters always request you to do. Please like, share, and comment. I'm your host, Paul Wafula. Until next time.